The most sacred night of the year, Christmas Eve. As the whole family gathered around the festive table, the man I had loved with all my youth picked up a leather belt, approached me, and screamed at me to kneel and confess my sin of adultery. The whistle of the belt through the cold air was like a blade, slicing through all grace and justice. I didn't cry or beg. I simply, silently, pulled out a USB flash drive and plugged it into the large TV in the living room. With the sound of fireworks in the background, the house fell into a deathly silence as the screen lit up with my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law, my husband's sister's husband, tangled in a shameful embrace. How did I, the daughter-in-law who had always been submissive and obedient, reach this dead end? And how did I get this shocking video? The night before Christmas Eve, the weather was cold, but people's hearts were warm. My husband's 3-story colonial house was more lively than ever. The aroma of roast turkey wafting from the kitchen filled the space, mingling with the savory smell of the gravy my mother-in-law was preparing. Carol had just set down the pot, and the laughter of aunts and uncles, along with the sound of children running through the yard, created a scene of harmony anyone would envy. I, Sarah, for the past 5 years, had been bustling in the kitchen. As my hands quickly arranged the platter of turkey, my eyes drifted to the living room, where my husband, Michael, was chatting with his uncles. His sturdy figure in a new shirt and his kind smile still made my heart beat as hard as it did when I first met him. I had always thought that as long as he was here, as long as this family was at peace, all my suffering and patience would be worth it. Until tonight. For the last 5 years, I had been deceiving myself. The Christmas Eve dinner, at least on the surface, unfolded in a cordial atmosphere. Carol, my mother-in-law, a sharp-tongued and authoritarian woman who considered her words the law of the house, seemed kinder than usual today. She served me a piece of turkey and said to everyone, "Our Sarah is so good and hard-working. Since she became my daughter-in-law, you have no idea how much work she's taken off my shoulders." I could only lower my head and smile. A programmed smile, perfected after years of learning to please others. I knew it was just an empty compliment. Barely a week ago, she had harshly berated me in public at the grocery store for buying vegetables that were slightly wilted, calling me blind and useless, a disgrace to the family name. My husband's sister, Laura, was a beautiful woman, but with a perpetually melancholic expression. Beside her was her husband, Mark, an extroverted and eloquent man who always knew how to please my mother-in-law. He was the ideal son-in-law Carol always praised in comparison to Michael, whom she considered too soft and unambitious. Everything would have continued to flow within that false peace, if not for the sound of a text notification on my phone. I had left it on the table while washing dishes. The message was from my boss, Mr. Henderson, an older superior who always helped me professionally. It was a normal, polite Christmas greeting. "Sarah, wishing you and your family a Merry Christmas and all the best." A completely harmless message. But that message was seen by Michael, and it became the spark that lit the fuse of a tragedy that had been smoldering in secret for a long time. Michael picked up my phone, and his face hardened. The kind smile from before vanished, replaced by a cold, strange expression I had never seen. Without asking me a word, he walked silently to the living room, where everyone was watching a Christmas special. Just as the clock struck midnight, on the sacred Christmas midnight, when everyone stood up to toast, Michael spoke suddenly. His voice broke the solemnity of the room. "One moment. Everyone. I have something to say." Everyone looked at him, perplexed. Michael walked to the center of the living room and held up my phone. "Sarah, come here for a moment." A bad feeling made my heart race. As soon as I stepped forward, before I could ask what was wrong, he threw the phone on the coffee table. "Explain yourself. Who is this bastard texting you at this hour? You've been cheating on me behind my back." The whole house froze, and I was speechless. His accusation was like a bucket of ice water in the middle of winter. I stammered, "What are you talking about? It's my boss. He just sent me a Christmas greeting." But my explanation was too weak against his already ignited rage. Carol immediately stepped in. Her gaze was as sharp as a knife, and her voice was cutting, as if she had found the perfect opportunity to humiliate me. "What kind of boss sends a message to another man's wife on Christmas Eve? I knew from your face you couldn't be trusted. You're the kind of woman who, even when married, goes around with other men." My sister-in-law, Laura, added with a voice full of sarcasm, "Mother, don't be surprised. She's pretty. It's normal for her to have men chasing her. Poor my brother Michael. I felt the world spin. Why? Why could they accuse me so brazenly? I looked at Michael with pleading eyes. Honey, you know me. I'm not like that. But Michael didn't look at me. He turned his head and stared at a wall. And then he did something I will never forget. He walked to a corner of the room. There hung an old leather belt that, according to family lore, his grandfather had left behind to discipline his descendants. He took it down. The sound of the creaking leather was chillingly dry. "Kneel," he said through clenched teeth. His eyes were bloodshot. "Kneel before our ancestors, before the whole family, and confess your sin. Tell me, how many times have you slept with him?" I took a step back in horror. My whole body trembled. No, this is not my husband. This man in front of me is not Michael. He is not the man who promised to protect me for life. He is a demon. I shook my head, and tears began to well up. "I've done nothing wrong. Please, don't do this." "Still making excuses?" Michael shouted. He brandished the belt, and the whistle of the air tore at my ears. No one in the family intervened. My mother-in-law stood with her arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. The relatives were scared, curious, or had simply made me the star of their macabre theater. Just before the belt fell, at the moment I thought I would die, beaten and humiliated on this Christmas night, all the love, all the patience, all the faint hope of the last 5 years shattered into dust. My heart no longer hurt. It had grown so cold, it had turned into a sharp piece of ice. I was no longer the lamb awaiting slaughter. No. Tonight, I was going to show them that when you corner a sheep, it can also become a wolf. I no longer retreated. I stood tall and looked Michael directly in the eyes. My hand slowly slipped into my coat pocket. There, I hid something far more fearsome than his belt. A small USB drive containing a truth capable of burning down this family's entire false honor. And as I walked toward the television, I knew it was I who was about to turn this game around. If this story has piqued your empathy and curiosity, don't forget to like it. And when the first image appeared on the screen, I knew this Christmas night would not only be about fireworks, but also the night a respectable family would crumble in disgrace. What happened in the following minutes? Everyone in the room held their breath with each of my steps. The belt in Michael's hand stopped midair, frozen like an ugly statue, a symbol of violence and cruelty. All eyes, previously filled with surprise, contempt, and morbid pleasure, were now focused on me. A small figure swimming against the current of a flood that threatened to swallow me. Perhaps they thought I had gone mad. A woman accused of adultery by her husband on Christmas Eve, surrounded by the entire family, instead of kneeling, crying, and begging, was calmly walking towards the television. Carol twisted her lips slightly. A disdainful smile was clearly drawn on her well-made-up face. "What new trick are you going to pull now? Who is this show for? Or are you going to play a sad song to beg for pity?" Her mocking voice broke the tense silence and echoed in the room. My brother-in-law, Mark, always pretending to be the model son-in-law, also let out a hypocritical sigh. "Sister-in-law, if you've done something wrong, just admit it. The most important thing for a woman is to protect the honor of her husband's family. If you make this a bigger deal, you'll only hurt yourself." His words, seemingly sincere advice, were actually another blade rubbing salt in my wound, implicitly confirming that I was the guilty one and should endure this humiliation in silence. I didn't answer. My hand didn't tremble at all as I inserted the USB drive into the side port of the large television. I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, not with cunning, but with tears and humiliation. The remote control was on the table. I picked it up and gently ran my fingers over the buttons. The light from the screen illuminated my face. I guess at that moment my expression was terrifyingly calm. I had been a clumsy actress for too long in the play called Happy Family. I had memorized the role of the sensible daughter-in-law, the competent wife, the person who knew her place. I played that role so perfectly that I almost forgot who I was, that I also had feelings, felt pain, and had dignity. But tonight, that role was over. The director of this play was me, and all of them, one by one, would have to play their true roles without masks. I turned my head and scanned the room. My eyes stopped on the man I once loved more than my own life, Michael. He was still there, the belt in his hand trembling slightly. The initial anger on his face was now mixed with a bit of bewilderment and confusion. He probably didn't understand why I could be so calm, why I wasn't screaming or begging as he and his family expected. "Sarah, what are you doing? Don't make things worse." "Make things worse?" I smiled faintly. A smile without warmth, a smile where despair had solidified like a stone. "Do you think anything could be worse than this, honey? Is there anything worse than being humiliated, falsely accused, and nearly beaten by your beloved husband in front of the whole family on Christmas Eve? Tell me, is there anything worse than this?" My voice wasn't loud, but each word pierced the silence of the room like a needle piercing through his cowardice. I stared into his eyes, trying to find some trace of the old Michael, of the man who promised to protect me, but all I saw was emptiness and fear. Michael lowered his head. He couldn't answer because he knew I was right. Seeing her son cornered, my mother-in-law shouted sharply. Her voice grated on my eardrums like a razor blade. "What right do you have? You've stained this family's honor with your adultery, so it's normal for you to be hit." "Michael, hit her already, son. Beat that shameless woman into shape," she urged as if she wanted to see me tortured immediately, as if my pain were her pleasure. But it was too late. Her words now only served to make the play I was about to screen more dramatic. Without another word, I turned around. My finger gently pressed the play button, and the television screen lit up. But what appeared was not a sad music video or a plea for sympathy. What was revealed in the crisp, full HD quality of the expensive television was a familiar setting, the living room of this very house. The shiny leather sofa and the large hunting scene painting that my mother-in-law was so proud of were visible, and the two protagonists were performing a play 1,000 times more disgusting than the false accusation they had just thrown at me. The woman in the video had her hair up in a high bun and a familiar figure. It was none other than my mother-in-law, Carol. And the man embracing her, caressing her back incessantly, was my brother-in-law, Mark, Laura's husband. That scene, that shameful and clandestine act of affection, was projected vividly, uncensored, in front of the entire family. The sound of people breathing seemed to stop. The noise of the fireworks outside suddenly felt awkward and distant. The whole world seemed to shrink to a deathly silence, and the raw, ugly images dancing on the large screen. The belt fell from Michael's hand to the floor. A dry, pitiful sound, a thwack that sounded as if the honor of an entire family was shattering. A whole respectable family was forced to witness an unbelievable truth. But how did I get this terrifying video? And what was the reaction of each family member when their true faces were unmasked on Christmas night? It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Time seemed to have stopped the instant those repulsive images appeared, revealing a raw and sick truth that no one could have imagined. The murmurs ceased, the children's laughter died down. Only a heavy, sticky silence enveloped everyone. The complexion of every face turned from astonishment and confusion to absolute disgust. The uncles and aunts, who had always prided themselves on the family's morality, now sat with their mouths agape, their eyes fixed on the screen as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Carol, my mother-in-law, who just minutes before had been arrogantly preaching morality and screaming for me to be beaten, was now frozen in place. Her eyes were fixed on her own image on the TV, her face as white as paper. Not even her elaborate makeup could hide the panic and humiliation that washed over her. Her lips moved, but not a single word came out. She staggered and barely managed to grab the arm of the sofa to stay upright. Her whole body trembled like a leaf. Beside her, my brother-in-law Mark, the man who always behaved so refined and courteous, was not much better. His face was ashen, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He stammered in a pathetic, trembling voice, This is fake. It's photoshopped." But his words were powerless against the vivid and realistic images unfolding before their eyes. Anyone could see it wasn't fake. It was the truth. A raw, disgusting truth. Perhaps the most shocked of all was my sister-in-law, Laura. She stood motionless. Her beautiful but always sad eyes were now filled with panic and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stared at the man she had always trusted, the man for whom she had dedicated her youth to building a home. Then she looked at her mother, whom she deeply respected. The two most important people in her life were betraying her in the most painful and humiliating way possible. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. Without sobs, just a heartbreaking silence. Slowly, she turned her head towards me. In her eyes, there was no longer sarcasm or contempt, but a complex, indescribable look. There was resentment towards me for revealing this cruel truth, but also a glimpse of gratitude for freeing her from a deception. And my husband, Michael, collapsed into the nearest chair as if all strength had left his body. He looked at the screen, then at me. His eyes were filled with incomprehensible confusion. He probably couldn't believe that his mother, whom he had always idolized and who had incited him to blame and mistreat his wife, was starring in the most repugnant of infidelity dramas. The faith and respect he had held for her for years had completely crumbled in a matter of minutes. Amid the eerie silence, the only person who remained composed was me. I picked up the remote and calmly pressed the pause button, freezing the most humiliating moment of my mother-in-law and brother-in-law on the screen. Then I turned and looked directly at each person in the room. My voice wasn't loud, but it resonated clearly and firmly, like a hammer striking their consciences. What's wrong? Is everyone very surprised? My respected mother-in-law, my esteemed brother-in-law. Does this video look familiar? Would you like me to play some more? I still have many, from different angles, recordings from a whole week, and I also have the original, unedited audio. My words were like a second bomb exploding in the room. Carol finally reacted. She let out a demented scream, a mixture of rage and extreme fear. "You crazy bitch! How dare you put hidden cameras in our house?" "Michael, what are you doing just standing there? Smash that TV and kill her." She lunged at me like a wounded beast, her hands raised to scratch me. But this time, Michael no longer obeyed her. He sat there, motionless, his gaze lost in the void. My brother-in-law, Mark, rushed to intervene, not to protect his mother-in-law, but to snatch the USB drive from the television. "Give me that! Give it to me!" he shouted as if he wanted to destroy the evidence. But I was quicker. I pulled out the USB drive and clutched it in my palm. "Want it back?" "It won't be easy, brother-in-law. And don't forget, I've saved copies of the original in several places. If anything were to happen to me, or if I simply felt like it, tomorrow the whole city could enjoy the wonderful performance of you and your mother-in-law." My threat had an immediate effect. Mark stopped dead in his tracks, his face pale and bloodless. He knew I wasn't joking. He knew that his career, his reputation, his family, everything he had worked so hard to build was in my hands. Just a few minutes earlier, the whole family was on the high ground of judgment, and now they had fallen into the abyss of humiliation. The play was over, but their tragedy had only just begun. But how could a daughter-in-law like me obtain such a momentous video? It was no coincidence. It was the result of 5 years of pain and suspicion that burned secretly throughout my married life. The biggest question on everyone's mind right now, the question I could read in their horrified eyes, was, why? How could I, the seemingly harmless daughter-in-law who always bowed her head in silence, hold such a terrible secret in my hands? They probably thought I was a cunning person who had been digging a trap and planning my revenge for a long time, waiting for the day to strike. But they were wrong. I wasn't the hunter. I was just the prey who, after being chased for too long, learned to fight back. This wasn't a truth I sought, it was a truth they themselves forced me to confront. It all started about a year ago with small signs, scattered pieces of a puzzle that were initially so unimaginable and contrary to morality that even I couldn't connect them. I began to notice something strange in the relationship between my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law, Mark. At first, I thought it was just Carol's special affection for a competent, witty son-in-law who always pleased her. She always praised Mark, his eloquence, his way of handling life, even the way he chose the fruit he gifted. Whenever Mark came over, she would go to the kitchen herself to prepare his favorite dishes. This attitude was markedly different from the sullen expression she usually showed me and Michael. It made me feel a little bad, but I told myself it was normal. My husband Michael was gentle, honest, and a bit slow, not as sharp and eloquent as his brother-in-law, so it was understandable that my mother-in-law favored her son-in-law. I tried to console myself with these thoughts and overcome the vague feeling of discomfort. But that affection gradually became stranger, crossing the boundaries of a normal mother-in-law and son-in-law relationship. I started to notice the glances they exchanged, furtive, meaningful looks, touches that seemed casual but lasted strangely long. Once, while I was in the kitchen, I casually glanced into the living room through the crack in the door. My mother-in-law was sitting on the sofa, and Mark was on the floor, his head resting on her lap as she stroked his hair. It was a very intimate scene, far from a normal relationship between a mother-in-law and son-in-law. I felt something was wrong. My throat went dry, but once again, I blamed myself for being too sensitive and overthinking. Maybe some families expressed affection so closely. I struggled to find reasons to defend them and reassure myself. My suspicions were truly confirmed when my sister-in-law Laura went on a business trip to Chicago for a week. During that week, Mark came to our house for dinner almost every day. The excuse was that he felt lonely at home and enjoyed eating with his mother-in-law. My mother-in-law couldn't hide her joy. She cooked banquets and cared for him more attentively than her own son. Every night, they would talk in the living room until very late. Their laughter reached my bedroom. One night, I went down to the kitchen for water. It was midnight, and I froze when I saw that the door to my mother-in-law's room was slightly ajar, and inside, I glimpsed the shadows of two people. At that moment, I felt my heart stop. I ran back to my room, my mind filled with horror and disgust. I should tell Michael, but I knew he would never believe me. He would think I was making up stories out of jealousy to hurt his mother. He would say again that I was overthinking, that I was too sensitive. The climax of my suspicions came on my mother-in-law's birthday. Michael and I got her an expensive silk scarf as a gift, but when we gave it to her, she accepted it with indifference, thanked us perfunctorily, and set it aside. When it was Mark's turn, he gave her a jade bracelet. Carol was so happy she hugged him, put the bracelet on her wrist, and caressed it all night. That night, after all the guests had left, I happened to pass by my mother-in-law's room. The door wasn't completely closed. I heard her talking on the phone with someone. Her voice was incredibly flirtatious and sweet. "Thank you for the gift. I love it. I wish you were here tonight." I was paralyzed. That voice was clearly that of someone talking to a man. But who was that man? It couldn't be. A terrible thought crossed my mind, and I got goosebumps. From that moment, I knew I couldn't remain silent. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I needed the truth, an explanation for everything that was happening in that house. I needed a talisman to protect myself from these hypocritical and dangerous people. And that's when the idea of installing a hidden camera in the living room began to germinate in my mind. It was a risky decision, but I knew it was the only way to unmask their true faces. Deciding to install the hidden camera wasn't easy. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. There was the fear of what would happen if I were discovered. They certainly wouldn't leave me alone. My mother-in-law, with her harsh and authoritarian character, would be capable of anything to silence me. There was the disgust of having to investigate and witness for myself the dirty affairs happening under the same roof where I lived. And there was also a hint of guilt for having to resort to a not entirely honorable method, invading others' privacy. But all those doubts quickly dissipated. I remembered the indifferent and insensitive look on my husband Michael's face every time I tried to vent about the injustices I suffered. Every time my mother-in-law insulted me for no reason, he remained silent, or worse, advised me to endure it to keep the peace in the house. I remembered the image of my mother-in-law hurling insults, treating me like an unpaid servant, and the image of my brother-in-law, with his hypocritical smile and cunning words that always hid a calculation. All that eliminated any hesitation in me. I knew that if I didn't save myself, no one would. In this game, I had no allies but myself. I spent several nights searching online, meticulously researching types of hidden cameras. I needed to choose one that was not visible but had good image quality. Finally, I chose a button-sized type that could be camouflaged as a coat hook. It had full HD quality, a clear recording microphone, and, most importantly, Wi-Fi connectivity, allowing me to watch in real time from my phone anywhere. I used the little money I had saved from my emergency funds, money I had kept without Michael's knowledge for unforeseen events. That money was supposed to be for my parents who lived in the countryside, but now I had to use it to protect myself. The installation was also a problem. I had to choose a time when the whole family was out of the house. Fortunately, that weekend the family went out of state to attend a distant relative's funeral. For me, it was a golden opportunity. On Saturday, I was alone in the house all day, my heart in my throat. I decided to install it in a high corner of the living room, camouflaged as a nail for hanging a landscape painting. From that position, I could see the entire living room, especially the sofa area where my mother-in-law and brother-in-law usually sat to talk. I struggled with it all afternoon, trembling, my heart pounding. Every time I heard a strange noise outside, every time a car passed, I jumped, fearing someone would suddenly return. Finally, after much effort, I finished the installation. I turned on my phone and connected it to the camera. The image was very clear, and the sound was decent. I let out a sigh of relief, but a heavy sense of anxiety settled in a corner of my heart. I had stepped into a world I never wanted to know. For the first few days, the camera caught nothing unusual. Life in the house went on as usual. My mother-in-law was still harsh with me. Michael was still indifferent, and my brother-in-law came by occasionally, still pretending to be the exemplary son-in-law in front of everyone. For a moment, I thought maybe I was really being paranoid. Maybe it was all a product of my imagination. But one Wednesday afternoon, while I was at the office, my phone vibrated with a notification. The camera had detected motion in the living room. I quickly opened the app to check. I felt my heart stop. On the screen were my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law Mark, sitting on the sofa. At first, they were talking normally, but soon Mark began to behave intimately. He wrapped his arm around her waist and whispered something in her ear. My mother-in-law didn't resist at all. On the contrary, she rested her head on his shoulder with a satisfied smile. I felt nauseous and couldn't watch anymore. I turned off the phone, ran to the bathroom, and vomited violently. The truth was much more disgusting than I had imagined. But that wasn't all. In the following days, the camera recorded countless even more terrible scenes. They hugged and kissed on the same sofa where the whole family used to sit and watch television. They said words and made affectionate gestures that only lovers would. And the climax was one afternoon when neither Michael nor Laura was home. They had sex without reservation in the living room. I had to witness all of it through the screen of my phone, alone, in silence, and with absolute terror. I saved all those videos, made several copies, and stored them in a safe place. I knew this was my weapon, my only way out of this hell, but I didn't act yet. I waited for the opportunity, for the moment when the last straw would break the camel's back. I didn't want to be the one to start the war. I wanted themselves, to light the fire of their own collapse. And on that Christmas night, when Michael raised the belt and my mother-in-law shouted accusations at me, I knew my moment had come. Now that the truth had been revealed, the living room was no longer a warm and harmonious gathering place. It had become a courtroom where everyone had to face the judgment of their conscience. And I, the accused, had unintentionally become the judge. The television screen remained frozen on the most humiliating moment. The silence in the living room was now more terrifying than a scream. It was like the calm before the storm, where everyone knew a terrible collapse was imminent, but no one could stop it. It was my mother-in-law, Carol, who first broke the silence, but not with words, but with an act of madness. Humiliation and fear had turned her into an irrational beast. She staggered, picked up an expensive porcelain vase from the table, and prepared to throw it at the television, as if doing so could erase the evidence of her sin. I'm going to smash it. I'm going to kill you, you bitch! But before she could act, a hand firmly gripped her wrist. It was my sister-in-law, Laura. It was the first time in the 5 years I had been married that I saw her act with such determination. The submissive woman, who lived under the shell of the perfect wife and mother, no longer existed. Enough, Mother. How long are you going to make a fool of yourself in front of everyone? Her voice trembled but was filled with rage. Tears still streamed down her cheeks, but in her eyes there was not only pain but also hatred. She turned to the man standing beside her, stiff as a statue, her husband, whom she had loved and trusted blindly. You, Mark, how could this happen? You and my mother. Are you too? The pain choked her, and she couldn't finish the sentence. It was a question she probably never in her life wanted to ask. Mark seemed to wake from a dream. He hastily knelt before Laura, grabbing her legs and beginning to cry pathetically. Another act of his play had begun. Laura, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I was forced by your mother. It's all her fault. She seduced me. I'm just a victim. His cowardly and shameless words left everyone stunned. Not even I, who knew him as a refined and courteous man, could have imagined he was capable of saying something so vile. To save himself, he was willing to blame his mother-in-law and lover entirely, trying to present himself as a poor victim, a weak man who couldn't resist the seduction of an older woman. Hearing this, Carol began to laugh like a madwoman. Her demented and pitiful laughter echoed in the room. A victim? You? A victim? Damn you! It was you, again and again, who came to me, seducing me with your sweet words. It was you who said your wife was always depressing and boring, that you only felt like a real man when you were with me, and now you try to blame me for everything? She shrieked, pointing directly at Mark's face. The fight between the two sinners turned the living room into a marketplace. They insulted each other, humiliated each other, and revealed the dirtiest secrets in front of all the relatives. It turned out their relationship wasn't a simple affair. There were also promises and calculations involved. Mark had used his mother-in-law to get favors at work, and Carol had found in her son-in-law the satisfaction her late husband never gave her. The incestuous drama had now become a farce of mutual accusations. Amid the chaos, my husband Michael finally reacted. He stood up and walked towards his mother, but he said nothing. He just looked at her with a strange, empty gaze, the look of a son who had completely lost faith in the mother he once idolized. Then he turned to me. His look was complex, a mixture of shame, regret, and something that looked like a plea. He opened his mouth. His voice was hoarse. "Sarah." But I didn't let him finish. I was too tired of late apologies and hypocritical regrets. I cut him off coldly. "What are you going to say? Ask for my forgiveness? Or say you didn't know anything? Michael, don't fool yourself. You're her son. You lived in this house. Did you really not notice anything strange? Or maybe you knew, but you chose silence, because you're a coward with no courage to face the truth." My words were like the last blade in his bleeding heart. Michael staggered, unable to say anything more. He realized I had seen everything. His silence, his indifference, were not carelessness, they were complicity. The fight continued with more fury. The relatives, who were previously spectators, now began to murmur, "My God, I can't believe it, what a scandal! The shame of the family. How are we going to face people now?" Poor Sarah. How much she must have suffered these 5 years. The pendulum of public opinion had swung completely to my side. They no longer looked at me with contempt, but with compassion, and even a little respect. I was no longer alone. The family court was coming to an end, but the judgment of society was just beginning, and in this storm, there would be people who would pay a very high price for the sins they had committed. The heated argument between my mother-in-law and brother-in-law only stopped when the great-uncle, the oldest and most authoritative relative, couldn't take it anymore and slammed his fist on the table. "Enough, all of you, be quiet!" Turning the house into this pigsty on Christmas Eve, in front of the memory of our ancestors. What a disgrace. His authoritative shout silenced everything for a moment. Carol and Mark stopped insulting each other but still glared with eyes that shot sparks. The hatred for the one who had betrayed them was now greater than the humiliation. The room fell back into a suffocating silence, broken only by agitated breathing and Laura's sobs. The great-uncle was my husband's father's brother, a strict, moralistic man respected by all. He had always been the one to mediate family matters, big and small. The great-uncle turned to me. In his gaze, there was no longer scrutiny, but a mixture of apology and a little guilt. "Sarah, my child, I have no words for this. On behalf of the family, I apologize to you. You have suffered too many injustices." I nodded slightly without saying anything. That apology, though late, gave me a small comfort. It showed that in this family, there was still someone who knew right from wrong, that it wasn't just me who had seen their corruption and hypocrisy. The great-uncle turned back to Michael with a stern voice. "And you, Michael, as a husband and head of the family, how did you allow something so terrible to happen? Instead of protecting your wife, you acted recklessly and violently, almost committing a grave sin. Do you still consider yourself a man? Do you think your late father could rest in peace if he knew this?" Each of his words was an invisible whip that lashed Michael's conscience. He hung his head, his shoulders trembling. He couldn't refute a single word. Everything the great-uncle said was true. He was a failed husband, a bad son, and a coward. After a moment of silence, the great-uncle, in a last attempt to fix the situation, made a decision. "Well, at this point, we can't hide it anymore. Let's resolve this discreetly at home so we don't become a laughingstock. The matter of Carol and Mark will be punished accordingly by the family later. And as for your marriage, Michael, you must formally apologize to Sarah and treat her well from now on." You must not let her suffer any injustice again." The great-uncle's words were like a final sentence, an effort to save the family's remaining honor. Everyone thought it was a reasonable solution. They expected me to accept that apology, continue with this marriage, and that everything would be buried in silence, like so many other injustices that daughters-in-law often suffer. But they were wrong again. Very wrong. I had been silent for 5 years. I had endured to the limit. If I had risen tonight, it was not to receive an apology or to continue a marriage that was already rotten. It was to reclaim my own freedom and dignity. I took a deep breath and looked directly at the great-uncle. My voice was calm but firm. "Uncle, I appreciate your kind words, but I cannot accept this solution." A new murmur of astonishment filled the room. No one could believe I dared to contradict an elder's decision. This is no longer a family problem. It has crossed the lines of marriage. It has crossed the lines of human morality. I cannot continue to live in an environment of lies, deceit, and perversion. I want a divorce. The word divorce came out of my mouth lightly, but with the destructive power of a bomb. Michael's head shot up, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "No, please, I've been an idiot. I'll fix it." "Can't you give me another chance?" He ran towards me, trying to take my hand, but I took a step back. "Chance? How many chances have I given you in these 5 years? Did you ever truly stand by my side? Or did you always hide behind your mother, watching me being mistreated, humiliated, without ever defending me? Michael, my love for you is dead. It died the very instant you raised that belt to hit me. My love was not something that could be discarded and picked up again. It had been trampled by him and his family until nothing was left. I turned to everyone in the room, to those stunned and shocked faces, and said, "And let everyone know, I am not deleting this video. I will send it to my lawyer. If in the future, anyone in this family dares to interfere in my life, I will not hesitate to make this video public for the whole world to see." My firm and unwavering statement officially ended everything. I was no longer a pawn in their hands. I was the one controlling the board. I had chosen my own path, a path free from their shadows. But would they let me go so easily? And would my struggle to regain my freedom end without problems? My declaration of divorce and the threat to publicize the video put the family in a bind. They couldn't force me to stay. They knew I was no longer the meek sheep from before. The fire inside me had already been lit and would burn anyone who tried to extinguish it. But they couldn't let me go easily either, because if that terrible secret came out, it would completely destroy the family honor they valued more than their own lives. That Christmas Eve ended in a heavy and somber atmosphere, with no trace of festive spirit. The relatives left hastily, murmuring, casting glances at me that mixed compassion with curiosity. I had become the center of a family tragedy, and this story would surely be on everyone's lips for a long time. I packed my bags that same night. I didn't have much, just some clothes and personal items. I had lived in that house for 5 years, but I felt that very few things truly belonged to me. Everything in the house, from the furniture to the small ornaments, had been bought by my mother-in-law, and she always made sure to remind me of it to assert her power. As I was leaving through the door, dragging my suitcase, Michael blocked my path. He no longer had the aggressive and violent look from before, but a pathetic and desolate one. His eyes were red and swollen. "Sarah, don't go. I know I have no right to stop you, but at least give me some time. Can't we talk again?" I looked at him with eyes empty of emotion. My heart was completely frozen. "There's nothing more to talk about, Michael. Everything is very clear. Move." But Michael didn't move. He knelt, clung to my legs, and cried like a child. "Please, Sarah, I can't live without you. You're my everything. If you leave, what will become of me?" I felt a mixture of disbelief and slight disgust. His everything? If I was his everything, why did he never protect me? If I was his everything, why did he want to hit me with a belt over a simple greeting message? If I was his everything, why did he let me face his mother's cruelty alone for 5 years? I pushed his hands away and said coldly, "It's not that you can't live without me. You're just afraid. Afraid that the truth will come out, of losing face, of having to face the consequences of what your family has done. You don't love me, Michael. You only love yourself." With that, I pushed him aside firmly and left that house, dragging my suitcase without looking back even once. His tearful pleas followed me, but they couldn't move my heart, which had already turned to stone. I took a taxi and temporarily stayed at a good friend's house. I didn't want to go directly to my parents' house to avoid worrying them. I needed time to calm down and clear my head. The next morning, I contacted a law firm, explained my whole story, and presented the video as evidence. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with a lot of experience, told me after watching the video that this was one of the rarest and most complex cases she had ever handled. She promised me she would process my divorce quickly and guarantee my rights to the fullest. Meanwhile, another war was raging in my in-laws' house. According to a neighbor friend, after my departure, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law continued to blame each other. My sister-in-law, Laura, after crying all night until she had no tears left, decided to separate. She packed her bags, took her young son, and moved in with a friend, unwilling to live under the same roof as an unfaithful husband and a depraved mother. My brother-in-law, Mark, abandoned by his wife and disowned by his in-laws, became a mess. He lived drunk every day, with no will to work. And Carol, after losing the trust of her daughter-in-law, her son-in-law, and her own daughter, completely collapsed. She no longer dared to leave the house, lacking the courage to face the neighbors' gossip. She locked herself in her room all day, crying and lamenting. The imposing 3-story house had become a cold and gloomy, lifeless place. My ex-husband Michael had to bear it all. He had to care for his shattered mother, face my divorce lawsuit, and endure the contempt of relatives and neighbors. He called and sent me messages several times, begging me to come back, but I didn't answer any of them. I blocked his number. I didn't want to hear any more lies. They were paying for their sins. But was that all? A family built on hypocrisy and lies, once it begins to crumble, cannot be stopped. During the following days, I lived in the tranquility I had longed for. I read books, listened to music, and walked in the park. I learned to take care of myself, to love myself. I realized that for the past 5 years, I had lived too much for others, sacrificing myself in the name of a family that was really just a gilded cage that imprisoned me with prejudices and absurd rules. Now, outside that cage, I felt what true freedom was, what it was to breathe the pure air of life. My divorce was settled quite easily. With irrefutable evidence, especially the video, my former in-laws didn't dare to cause trouble. They were afraid I would carry out my threat and make everything public. The court, after reviewing the documents, issued a judgment quickly. I got the right to divorce and to receive half of the marital assets, which included savings and some other assets. Additionally, Michael had to pay me alimony to help me stabilize my life after the divorce. The judgment was completely fair and reasonable. Michael did not appeal. He probably knew that any plea was useless. On the day in court, we didn't look at each other. Our marriage ended like that, abruptly and coldly, without goodbyes, without regrets. After the divorce, I decided to start a new life with the money I was awarded. I didn't want to go back to my hometown and be a burden on my parents. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, to rebuild my life. I rented a small, pretty apartment in the city and decorated it myself to my taste with bright, warm colors. I found a new job in a communications company, something I really liked and where I could develop my skills. My life began to stabilize gradually. I made new friends, established new relationships. I was no longer the submissive and patient Sarah of the past. I was an independent, self-sufficient, and happy woman. I learned to smile again, a sincere smile that came from the heart. Meanwhile, the tragedy of my former in-laws had not ended. The incestuous scandal, despite attempts to hide it, finally came to light. You can't hide a needle in a haystack. The relatives who were present that Christmas night, despite being asked for discretion, couldn't keep such a shocking story secret. They told one person, and that person told another. Soon, the whole neighborhood and then the whole city found out. The family honor they valued so much was completely destroyed. My ex-brother-in-law, Mark, after a period of living drunk and dissolute, was fired from his company. No company wanted to hire someone with such a scandal. Having lost his job, his family, and his honor, he couldn't bear the blow. He took refuge in alcohol until one night, driving drunk, he had an accident and hit a pedestrian. That accident sent him to prison, and thus ended the life of a man who was once considered successful and exemplary. My ex-sister-in-law Laura had a rather difficult life after the separation. She had to raise her son alone, fighting against the world's prejudices. But perhaps for her, it was a liberation. She no longer had to live under the hypocritical oppression of her family. She found a job at an online store that, although hard, was enough to live on. Sometimes she would message me to see how I was doing. In those messages, there was no longer the sarcasm or contempt of before, but empathy and a little gratitude. She said that I had helped her realize the true face of the people she trusted. And Carol, after so many traumas, fell into a severe depression. She lost her sharp mind of before. She always muttered to herself and said nonsensical things. Michael had to admit her to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. The imposing 3-story house became a desolate and cold place. Michael lived there alone, in solitude. He had to sell part of the house to pay for his mother's treatment and the compensation to the victim of his ex-brother-in-law's accident. His life became a succession of bleak days with no way out. Each one received the end they deserved for their actions. But the story was not over yet. There was still one person, the one who caused me the greatest pain, who had not yet received his final judgment. I mean, my ex-husband, Michael. Although he had to bear the loneliness, remorse, and the weight of a broken family, I felt that it wasn't enough punishment for what he had done to me. He was not the mastermind of the perverse plot, but his cowardice and indifference were the fertile ground that allowed all that evil to grow. If from the beginning he had protected me, if he had listened to me, if he had trusted me, the tragedy might not have happened. He could have stopped the inappropriate relationship between his mother and his brother-in-law. He could have given me a real home, but he didn't. He chose silence, indifference, and sacrificing me for his false peace. I no longer hated him. When love dies, hatred loses its meaning. Dwelling on hatred would only exhaust my soul. But I wanted him to truly understand the pain I had gone through. I wanted him to taste what it feels like when the whole world turns its back on you, when the person you love most betrays you. I wanted him to face his own cowardly nature and feel remorse for an unforgivable mistake. And I knew there was a way to do it. Not with violence or a loud revenge, but with a deep and painful psychological blow. I still had a copy of that terrible video. I had thought I would never use it again, that it would be a secret buried forever. But now I had another idea. I wouldn't make it public for everyone. That would make me like them, someone who satisfies public curiosity by revealing others' dirty stories. I would send it to only one person, a person I knew could deal a mortal blow to Michael, a blow more painful than losing face, money, or being despised by the world. That person was Michael's father, Mr. Clark, who had passed away 10 years ago. It sounds crazy. How can you send something to a dead person? But I knew there was a way to get that video to him, a way to make his voice, his teachings, resonate again in Michael's mind. My father-in-law in life was a very strict and patriarchal man. He was a retired school principal and always considered family honor and human morality as the most important things. He taught Michael a lot about the duties of a husband, about the responsibility of a man, and I knew he had a close friend, a friend with whom he shared all his secrets. It was Mr. Peterson, a neighbor of my former in-laws, also a teacher, who had moved away after my father-in-law's death. They were kindred spirits who drank tea together, played chess, and discussed world affairs. It took me a while to contact Mr. Peterson. Finally, through an old acquaintance, I got his phone number. I called him and introduced myself as Mr. Clark's former daughter-in-law. I told him the whole story without hiding any details. At first, Mr. Peterson didn't believe me. He couldn't believe something so terrible could have happened in the family of his friend, whom he deeply respected. He still vividly remembered the image of Carol as a sensible wife and Michael as a good and docile son. But when I sent him the video to watch, he was speechless. His eyes turned red and his hands trembled. He said, "If my friend were alive, he surely wouldn't have withstood this blow. He surely would have cut ties with both his wife and his son. He would have considered it the greatest dishonor of his life." I asked Mr. Peterson for a favor. I asked him to send this video to Michael, but not by email or text message. I wanted him to show it to him in person on the anniversary of my father-in-law's death. I wanted Michael, on the day he honored the memory of his deceased father, to face the most humiliating truth of his family. I wanted him to feel remorse before his father's altar for what he had done and for what he had allowed to happen. I wanted his father's teachings, whom he had always respected, to become the sentence that judged him. It was a cruel revenge, but I didn't regret it because I knew it was the only way to awaken a man who had been asleep for too long in cowardice and indifference. The anniversary of my ex-father-in-law's death was a late autumn day, cold with a persistent drizzle. The gloomy and sad atmosphere seemed to empathize with the tragedy of that family. I didn't go. My relationship with that family was completely over, but a small ripple still stirred in my heart. I wondered if my plan would work as expected, if this final blow would really reach the deepest part of Michael's soul. That night, as I sat alone in my cozy apartment drinking a cup of hot tea, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment but answered. On the other end of the line, I heard the calm and sad voice of Mr. Peterson, mixed with weariness. "Miss, I have done what you asked." He told me what had happened that day. Michael had set up a modest altar in the empty, cold house. Only a few close relatives, who still felt some affection for the family, attended. Carol was still in the hospital and couldn't attend, and Laura didn't go either. The atmosphere of the commemoration was very gloomy and heavy, completely different from previous years when the family was still considered respectable. After everyone had paid their respects, Mr. Peterson called Michael aside in the garden. He didn't say many words, just handed him a tablet and played the video. He told him he wanted him to see something that Michael, and probably his father, would want to see. At first, Michael was bewildered, not understanding what was happening. He probably thought it was old photos of his father, but when the first image appeared, his face changed color. He froze in horror, his gaze fixed on the screen. He watched the video repeatedly, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. His whole body trembled, not with anger, but with pain and humiliation. Then he looked at Mr. Peterson. His eyes were full of desperation. "How do you have this?" Mr. Peterson replied calmly, his voice heavy with age. "Sarah sent it to me. She said she wanted you, before the spirit of your father, to see for yourself what this family has become. She wanted you to ask yourself how your father would have felt if he were alive." Mr. Peterson's words were like the final dagger that pierced Michael's shattered heart. The image of his father, strict but who loved him deeply. His father's teachings on human morality, on family honor, all resurfaced in his mind. He couldn't take it anymore. He broke down crying like a child. He collapsed, covered his face, and cried out loud in the garden of his house under the astonished gaze of the relatives. It was the first time in years that people saw Michael cry. They were late tears, but perhaps they were tears of understanding. He cried for a long time, not caring that the rain grew heavier and soaked him completely. Mr. Peterson said that from that day on, Michael changed completely. He no longer tried to cling to me. He accepted the truth, accepted the punishment. He sent me a text message with just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply, but I knew that this time the apology was sincere. He sold the 3-story house. Part of the money went to his mother in the hospital, and another part he sent to Laura to help her raise her son. With the remaining money, he rented a small studio and lived a quiet, solitary life. He found a night job and worked hard to earn money, to atone for his mistakes. He was no longer Michael, the son of the respectable Clark family. He was just an ordinary man trying to live with a conscience so as not to shame his late father. Hearing Mr. Peterson's story, I felt neither glee nor joy. I only felt a strange peace. Finally, everything was over. Each one had found their own path, however hard and painful it might be. I was no longer tied to the past. I was ready to move on, to start a new chapter in my life, a chapter without the shadows of lies and betrayal. My story, a story full of tragedy and tears, finally came to an end. But it was not a fairy tale happy ending. It was a realistic ending, an ending where justice was served and everyone learned their own costly lesson. Over time, the wounds in my heart also began to heal. I learned to forgive, not for them, but for myself. I forgave so I wouldn't keep carrying the weight of the past, to live a lighter and calmer life. I forgave my own naivety and foolishness for having trusted the wrong people. I forgave my own weakness and docility for having remained silent and endured for so long. I realized that holding a grudge would only exhaust my soul more, and in the end, the only one who would get hurt would be me. My life is very peaceful now. My job at the media company got better and better. My superiors trusted me and assigned me important projects. My colleagues appreciated and respected me for my ability and sincerity. With my own efforts, I bought an apartment, a real home for myself. There, I could be myself freely, without anyone's gaze or oppression. I also started to open my heart more. I no longer feared love or lost faith in men. I participated in clubs and social activities. I took yoga classes to improve my health and flexibility. I made many new friends who helped me rediscover the joy and meaning of life. And at a book club meeting, I met the kind and warm man who melted my cold heart, my current husband. He was an architect, 5 years older than me, and had also been through a divorce. Perhaps that's why he understood and empathized with what I had been through. He didn't care about my past. He was only interested in the person I am today. He made me feel what true love and respect are, something I never got in my previous marriage. We decided to be together and build a small, happy home based on trust, respect, and sharing. Sometimes, through friends, I would get news of my former in-laws. Carol, after a long treatment in the psychiatric hospital, was discharged, but she was no longer the sharp and authoritarian woman of before. Her mind came and went, and sometimes she didn't even recognize Michael. Michael continued to care for her alone, silently, and without a single complaint. He worked at night and took care of his mother's food and medicine. Some said it was his penance. Perhaps it was. He was paying the price for his cowardice by taking on the responsibility of a son, a responsibility he should have assumed much earlier. Laura moved to Chicago with her son after the divorce. She cut all contact with her family. She found a stable job at a clothing company, and I heard she met a good man who loved and protected them both. I was happy for her. She deserved to be happy after everything she had been through. And my ex-brother-in-law, Mark, after getting out of prison, disappeared without a trace. No one knows where he went or what he does. He probably no longer had the face to face the world. A man who once had everything, career, family, honor, finally lost it all because he couldn't overcome his base desires. One weekend afternoon, while my husband and I were shopping at a supermarket for things for our new home, I unexpectedly ran into Michael. He was working as a delivery man for a grocery store, diligently loading boxes of products onto an old scooter. He wore a worn-out uniform, and his face was gaunt and thin. He looked 10 years older. As we passed each other, our eyes met by chance. For an instant, I saw shame, embarrassment, and regret in his eyes. I greeted him with a slight nod of the head, a light greeting, without hatred or resentment, and then I walked away, smiling and on my husband's arm. The past was behind me. Now, before me was a bright future, a happiness I had had to fight hard to achieve, and I knew I would cherish and protect it with all my strength. The chance encounter at the supermarket was like my final goodbye to the past. It didn't awaken any negative emotions in me like anger or contempt. On the contrary, I felt a sense of lightness. I saw the change in Michael and the price he was paying. He was no longer the violent and patriarchal man of the past, but an ordinary person struggling with life, carrying the weight of his mistakes on his shoulders. And I saw the peace in my own soul. I was no longer his victim. I was a victor. Not because I had taken revenge on them, but because I had overcome everything and found my own happiness. I did not let that dark past ruin my future. My wedding to my current husband was simple but warm, with only the closest family and friends. My parents, after knowing my whole story, no longer opposed my second marriage. At first, they were a little worried that I would get hurt again, but after meeting my husband, seeing the sincerity, maturity, and love he showed me, they were completely at ease. They just wanted me to be happy, and I truly was. My husband is a wonderful person. He loves me, takes care of me, always listens to me, and understands me. He never judged my past. On the contrary, he valued what I had lived through. He said those experiences had made me the strong and resilient person I am today. He helped me erase the traumas of the past and believe in love and marriage again. We had a beautiful and adorable daughter, whom we named Anna. She is the joy of the whole family, the source of our life. Every time I see her smile, I feel that this world is truly beautiful. I had everything a woman could wish for: a good husband, a good daughter, a stable job, and a peaceful life. I learned to value the simple things, the small moments of happiness in life, a warm family dinner, a walk in the park in the afternoon with my husband and daughter, my daughter's hug before bed. All these things are precious gifts that life has given me. Sometimes in the deep of night, when I look back, I still feel a shiver. I had to go through a lot of pain and many tears. There were moments when I despaired, when I thought I would never get out of that hell. But I don't regret it because it was precisely those trials that made me more mature and stronger. They taught me valuable lessons about life. Never let anyone trample on your dignity and self-esteem. Always stand up to protect yourself and fight for the happiness you deserve. It also taught me that silence is not always golden. Sometimes, silence is precisely complicity with evil. My story may be a sad story, but it is also a story of hope. It shows that after the storm, there is always a calm. No matter the difficulties and trials you face, never lose hope. Believe that at the end of the road, happiness is waiting for you. If you just have the courage to go through the darkness, you will find the light of your life. And remember, you are never alone. There are still many people around you who love you and are willing to help you. And if you too have suffered pain and injustice like me, do not hesitate to share your story. Perhaps your story can be a source of motivation and inspiration for many other people who need it. Life went on like that, in peace. My daughter Anna grew smarter and more adorable every day. She looked a lot like her father, from her appearance to her kind and compassionate character. My husband's and my love also deepened and strengthened with the days. Together we took care of our daughter. Together we built our small home. I had almost forgotten the existence of the people from my past. They had become blurry shadows that no longer had any impact on my life. But life sometimes plays really cruel jokes, making people who seem to have no more connection meet again. One day, while taking my daughter to the pediatrician, I ran into Laura again. She was sitting in the waiting room, her face full of worry and fatigue. Beside her was a boy of about 7 or 8, probably her son. The boy looked tired and pale and was resting his head on his mother's shoulder. I was going to walk past. I didn't want to stir up the past. Although I no longer hated her, I didn't want any more entanglements either. But then Laura saw me. A flash of surprise crossed her eyes, and then she stood up hastily and walked towards me. "Sarah, is that you?" Her voice was a little hesitant, unsure. I had probably changed a lot from the image of the thin, submissive sister-in-law of before. I nodded slightly. "Hi, Laura." She looked at me and then at my daughter, in my arms. In her gaze, there was a little envy. But more than that, there was admiration. "You look very happy." I smiled lightly and serenely. "Thank you, Laura. Is your son sick?" "He doesn't look well," she sighed. In that sigh were contained all the hardships. "He's had a fever for several days, and it's not going down. I'm worried. It's very difficult to come to the hospital alone with him." We sat and talked for a while like old friends meeting again after a long time. She told me that her life in Chicago was very hard, that she had to work alone to raise her son. The man she had met later had also abandoned her after a short time, leaving her alone with the burden. She said she deeply regretted what had happened. She regretted not having seen the true face of her husband and her mother sooner. She regretted having joined them to torment me. She sincerely apologized to me. "I'm sorry, Sarah. As a woman, I should have understood and supported you. Back then, I was too stupid and selfish." I no longer hated her. I understood. She was also just a victim in that tragic play, a victim of deception and her own weakness. I comforted and encouraged her, and even gave her some money to help with the child's medicine. At first, she refused, but faced with my sincerity, she finally accepted. Before we parted, she took my hand, her eyes red. She said something I will never forget. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for showing that women, even if we fall, can get back up again. I will live strongly for my son and for myself." That meeting made me reflect a lot. I realized that forgiveness not only helps others, but also myself. When we forgive, we free ourselves from the chains of the past. We give ourselves the opportunity to live a new life, a life no longer tormented by hatred. Forgiving is not forgetting, it is accepting and moving on. It doesn't change the past, but it opens up a brighter future. And I had really achieved it. I had forgiven everything. I had let the past rest in peace because I knew that true happiness is not taking revenge on those who have hurt you, but finding peace in your own soul. My story ends here. A long journey, full of ups and downs, tears, and painful lessons. From a submissive and patient daughter-in-law, a person who lived like a shadow in her own house, I had to become a strong and determined woman who fought for her dignity and happiness. I lost the family and the marriage in which I once placed all my youth, but I recovered myself. I discovered values and an inner strength I never knew I had. I had to taste the most painful betrayal from the people I once considered dearest, but I learned to love and value the people who truly deserve it. Life took a lot from me, but it gave me things much more valuable. If I tell this story again, it is not to incite hatred or to boast of a victory. I don't want people to gloat over the fall of a family. I retell it because I know that out there are still many women living in situations similar to mine. They endure not only physical violence but also mental violence, insults, and injustice. They live every day in marriages without love or respect, but they dare not speak up. They dare not resist because they are afraid. They feel alone. They are bound by social prejudices and the idea of, for the children, for the family. They think there is no way out. I want to tell them, you are never alone. You are never weak. Strength lies dormant in each of us. If you dare to stand up, if you dare to raise your voice, you will surely find a path to liberation for yourselves. Do not give anyone the right to trample on your dignity. Do not sacrifice yourselves for things that are not worth it, because you, all women, deserve to be loved, respected, and live a happy life. Happiness is not far away. It is in your choice. Believe that after the rain, the sun always comes out, and that after the storms of life, a clear day will surely come. Believe in it and move forward bravely. Happiness is waiting for you. Do not fear change. Do not fear loneliness. Because sometimes loneliness is precisely the opportunity to reconnect with yourselves, to realize your true worth. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story has touched your hearts, if it has given you a little courage and faith, please don't hesitate to leave a comment and share, because your empathy is precisely the greatest force that unites us as women to overcome all difficulties and trials of life together. And don't forget, always love and value yourselves because you are unique and deserve the best. And so the story of Sarah comes to an end, a story that covers the entire spectrum of emotions, from injustice and pain to catharsis and finally, serenity. Listening to her journey, each of us will surely reflect. Some will be outraged by the hypocrisy and evil of the in-laws. Others will feel a cathartic satisfaction at the punishment they received. But perhaps what remains most deeply in our hearts is not hatred, but the extraordinary strength of a cornered woman and a profound lesson about the value of self-esteem, respect, and boundaries in relationships. This story is not simply a sensational family drama. It is a mirror that reflects the dark corners of society where prejudices about the role of women, especially daughters-in-law, still weigh heavily. The protagonist, Sarah, initially, like many other women, chose the path of patience and resignation to maintain the so-called family peace. She sacrificed herself, sacrificed her emotions just to obtain tranquility, but life taught her a bitter lesson. Blind patience does not bring peace. It only feeds the selfishness and evil of others. Her silence was not seen as a virtue, but as a weakness. Her sacrifice was not respected, but taken for granted. And perhaps the greatest lesson we can draw is that kindness and tolerance must be given to the right people in the right place. Being good to others is valuable, but it becomes a tragedy if our kindness is exploited, if we allow others to trample our dignity without any resistance. Self-esteem is not selfishness. It is the basic foundation for a human being to stand firm in life. When we lose our self-esteem, we also lose the respect of others. Another point very worthy of reflection is the role of the husband. Michael was not the one who was unfaithful or who directly hurt Sarah, but his cowardice, his indifference, and his silence were the sharpest knife that caused the deepest wound in his wife's heart. This story is a wake-up call for men who are husbands and sons. Being the pillar of the family not only means earning money, but being the person who protects and defends his wife from injustice, even if that injustice comes from the dearest family. A truly strong man is not the one who raises his fist, but the one who has the voice of justice, who knows how to put himself in his wife's shoes, understand, and share. Silence in the face of injustice is sometimes more terrifying than the injustice itself. Finally, the way Sarah concludes the story also gives us a lesson about forgiveness and moving on. She could have completely destroyed her former in-laws. She could have reveled in their suffering, but she did not. She simply reclaimed what belonged to her, demanded justice for herself, and then chose to leave. She understood that holding a grudge would only weigh down her own soul. True happiness does not come from revenge, but from finding peace in the soul. She chose to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved to live a peaceful life. All of us in life will face injustices and trials. There will be times when we feel weak, alone, wanting to give up everything. But remember the story of Sarah. Remember that the greatest strength always lies within ourselves. Learn to set boundaries. Learn to say no to what is wrong. Learn to love and value yourselves first. Because only when we know our own worth can others respect us. The story shared in this video is a work of fiction created for educational and entertainment purposes. All characters, events, and situations are products of the imagination. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The content of the video aims to convey humanistic lessons about life, family, and social relationships, and is not intended to attack or criticize any particular individual or organization. Viewers are advised to consider and filter the information appropriately. Thank you for listening to the end. If this story and its lessons have touched your hearts, please press the like button to help spread this meaningful message. What do you think of the story? Have you experienced or witnessed any similar situations? Leave a comment below. Let's share and listen together.